Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of May of 2023. Today we have some interesting updates, so let's start. And today, for the first time since the beginning of May, we got another very interesting information about the head of Ukraine army Zaluzhnyi. If you know, the Russian sources are saying that Zaluzhnyi was wounded as a result of missile attack that took place in Pavlograd a few weeks ago. If you remember, we published the video from that explosion. That was the Pavlograd used to be some kind of headquarters where Zaluzhnyi had his positions and was preparing the counter-offensive operation in Bakhmut, but as a result of missile attack, he was wounded. And we didn't discuss this attack, and probably Zaluzhnyi was attacked by the Russians' missiles as a revenge and as an answer for the Ukrainian attacks of Kremlin. If you remember, there was an attack of Kremlin, and probably that was the answer to that attack, to that situation. Anyway, so today the local Odessa Telegram channel published a video of Zaluzhnyi in the institute of some local college, and that was like some kind of event about the Science Day in Ukraine or something like this. And they published the video where he had some speech and so on. But most of the Ukrainian media haven't taken that piece of news and haven't republished that piece of news on their channels. And for now, it's very difficult to determine, because the video with Zaluzhnyi dated to the 19th of May. So it's very difficult to understand whether it is real information or it is a fake. But anyway, this is like or the real confirmation of Zaluzhnyi that he's okay, or probably the Ukrainians are trying to fix the situation and the issue with his status and what is going on with him. Furthermore, as you mentioned, there are any active actions from the Ukrainian side today and yesterday. And the Ukrainians, of course, continue reporting about the counter-offensive operation in Bakhmut. But the main thing why the Ukrainians are not active is, of course, the meeting G7. And today, as you know, there was a meeting between Zelenskyy and Joe Biden. I believe that Zelenskyy received the final instructions about what to do and when to do and how to do. Furthermore, the White House announced about another aid to Ukraine. And the Russian sources are saying that currently the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian commanders are waiting the return of Zelenskyy with certain commands, certain orders, and after that they will start doing something. If they're going to do, they will do only the after returns of Zelenskyy. So now let's go to Bakhmut, to Ukraine, to Bakhmut, and so on. And as you know, yesterday and today there are 2 dates. The Russians captured this town and pushed the Ukrainians to step back. Furthermore, the Ukrainians, as you know, during the previous days made a few counter-offensive operations on the flanks, but currently they've stopped and they're not continue further. But for example, the third Air Assault Brigade continue publishing updates about some successes from their side, but as we know, they're trying currently to cross the channel in direction of Klishevka fortifications. This 3rd Assault Brigade, they published more information about progress from their side. But anyway, the Russian military experts say that currently the Ukrainians completely left Bakhmut and they entered the Ivanovska and the fields in the valley between Chasov Yar and Ivanovska. Furthermore, most of the forces have been already redeployed to the Chasov Yar, and it's like 77th Armobile Brigade, 9th Separate Rifle Battalion that used to be inside of the western part of Bakhmut. For example, 241st Territorial Defense Brigade was moved, and already 23rd Separate Purpose Battalion was moved to the western part of Bakhmut. So most of the forces have already been evacuated. This is a very difficult and ongoing process, and I believe that these days the mappers will update their maps, and most of the forces will leave the valley between Chasov Yar and Bakhmut. Another interesting update came today from Chasov Yar. The Ukrainian sources are saying that the Chasov Yar authorities and the authorities of the settlements in the vicinity of Chasov took a decision to start the evacuation process of the civilians and so on. Probably the main reason of that is that recently most of the forces were located in the western part of Bakhmut, so their accommodation was there. And now there is a lot of forces from the valley, from western part of Bakhmut and from Bogdanovka and many other parts of this bridgehead were redeployed back to Chasov Yar, and currently they just need a place to deploy this big army, and the only possible solution for that is to start evacuation and to move people from schools, from buildings and so on. So currently the Ukrainians launched the evacuation process. I don't think that the Russians are going to continue immediately offensive operation further to capture Ivanovska, Bogdanovka, Gryanivka and so on. I don't think so, because as we discussed, there is just one forces who can do this currently, and I'm talking about Wagner's, and the head of Wagner, Prigozhin, reported that they're going to leave Bakhmut by the 25th of May. So today is 21st of May, it's like a few days later he's going to leave with his forces Bakhmut. The United Kingdom intelligence reported that, according to their data, Wagner's will be removed from the combat line for a few months to their base, to their camps, to restore their power, to restore their forces, to fulfill and so on. Later, they will be returned back to Ukraine. But the United Kingdom intelligence are saying that the number of forces of Wagner's will be reduced. And currently, the Minister of Defense is planning to use them just as the special forces for some certain job, certain missions. But according to United Kingdom intelligence, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation is not going to use Wagner's like as the main forces to storm, let's say, Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. So probably those storming operations will be made by other forces, other Russian forces, not by Wagner's. And now we can speak a little bit and talk a little bit about the recent update that, according to the Minister of Defense Shoigu, since the beginning of this year, they managed to sign contracts with around 120,000 soldiers. And you need to understand the difference between the mobilized soldiers and the contractors who sign contracts. And there is one important difference between these two types of forces, and I'm talking about the motivation. We understand that those soldiers, those people, those regular people who were mobilized in October and November, they have a very low level of motivation. They were drivers, taxi drivers, workers, they were working in plants, and they were like teachers, doctors, and many other sellers, managers, and at some day they were mobilized without asking them whether they want or not. They were mobilized and they were sent to the combat line. Imagine yourself their level of their motivation. Of course, their motivation is the lowest, and the Russians, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, understand that they can't use these forces, these mobilized forces, as the main stormtroopers because of low motivation. And so that's why the President of Russian Federation, Putin, asked and required to increase the level of contracts, because if you sign a contract, that means that you are by yourself take a decision to sign contract, so that means that you are motivated. And these forces is the best thing for storming operations, and that means that Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that by the 25th of May, they managed to accumulate up to 120,000 stormtroopers contract forces. And these forces will be completely under Russian control of Ministry of Defense, and probably they are planning to use these forces for main battle of this year, for Slaviansk-Kramatorsk battle, the final battle and the most important battle of this year, at least from the Russian side. Now let's talk a little bit about the local changes in Bakhmut. These days there were a lot of talks and rumors that Russians managed to capture or establish control over Khromove, but to tell the truth, this is not the real information. The Wagners just have started movements in direction of Khromove along the forest line that located on the northeast of Khromove, and from another way they're attacking from the residential area from the western part of Bakhmut. I expect that within the next 24 hours this area will be taken by Wagner's, and probably during watching of this video within the next day, you're going to see this is going to be like a real update, but not like some kind of event. So currently we can already, I believe, mark this area as a gray zone, because I understand that the Russians have already launched their offensive operation in this area, Wagner's, and this is very important operation because according to the contract, as I understand, according to the agreements between the Ministry of Defense and Russians, Wagner's, as Prigozhin reported, they need to give these positions to the Ministry of Defense, and the most important, they need during the next 5 days to prepare the bridgehead, to demine as much as possible, to check the buildings, and to prepare the first line of defense. And when talking about this area, we understand that this is exactly fit to the requirements, that this might be the first defense line. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians, no matter the Ukrainians' counter-offensive operation in the vicinity of this forest line of the 76th, 67th and the 92nd brigades on the south of the water reservoir of Berkhovka, were attacking these positions, but anyway the Russians managed to keep this forest line, and currently they do have some kind of fire control over this road, so probably this is not a very big deal today to establish control over Khromove. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources are saying, and the Russians confirm this information, that the Ukrainians, the regular Ukrainian soldiers, are very happy that Bakhmut was taken by the Russians. Of course, it sounds nonsense how the Ukrainians can be happy that Bakhmut fell, but we can understand those soldiers, because imagine yourself, Ukraine has a very big army, and it's like a curse when you are receiving order that your squad or your brigade will be sent to Bakhmut. It's like one-way ticket, right? So there is no chances to get back, and those people who managed to survive and left the western part of Bakhmut are the luckiest people in the world. And now soldiers, regular soldiers, understand that there are no more Bakhmut, that at least the next months, week or days there are going to be a small operational pause that the parties will spend to fulfill their ammunitions, tanks to replace, tanks to repair everything that needed to be repaired, to do some rotations and so on. And the next months probably is going to be, if we can talk about calm months during the special operation, they're going to be a calm and with less activities on the front line. Only if Zelenskyy returns after returning from Japan, from G7, will start the greatest counter-offensive operation, because we understand that soldier is soldiers, but if Joe Biden wants the continuing escalations, they're going to be, of course, they can continue escalations of clashes, and then they're going to be another Bakhmut and so on. Furthermore, currently, according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians controls the forest lines in the valley between the Khromove and the, let's say, the western outskirts of Bakhmut. So this is the current Ukrainian edge positions, and they were also very probably the Russians, managed also to establish control over this residential area on the south of the MiG-17 stadium. So this one, probably this area is also under Russian control, so we'll mark this as the green zone, and I believe that within the next few days we're going to receive more updates about this territory. There were no updates about this area, so probably this is not even the gray zone, because nobody can't control this area. This is the open field. The Ukrainian positions is in the forest, the Russians is in the buildings, so probably the Russians neither wants to attack and develop, because there is nothing to develop into, and the Ukrainians are not going to return or to launch any counter-offensive operation. One more time, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported about the fact that that Bakhmut still under Ukrainian control, and that there are still Ukrainians. Furthermore, Zelenskyy himself reported that there are still forces inside of Bakhmut, but the Russians are saying that Artyomovsk is currently under complete their control. And furthermore, we know that Ukrainians during the previous weeks made attempt to attack the Ukrainians on the flanks, and the Ukrainians were saying that those attacks were pretty successful. But let's talk about facts. How many settlements the Ukrainians managed to return as a result of their counter-offensive operation? I will answer you 0. They just established control over the fields and forest lines, and currently without any support of settlement, this is very difficult to hold these positions, and probably They will step back towards the forests between Chasov and Bakhmut and Ivanovska as well. If you ask me who is going to capture all these towns like Ivanovska, Bogdanovka, Grigorievka and so on, my projection is that those towns will be taken by the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation and regular Russian army. Wagners are not going to enter these towns. They will go back, and this is my understanding of this situation. But let's see, maybe there's very chances that Prigozhin plays his own game, and this is another speculation from his side, as the speculation about the leaving of Bakhmut on the 10th of May. We'll see. Maybe this is another part of game and the Wagners will continue offensing, but I don't believe this. I think that everything is going to be as he told us, that he will leave Bakhmut and they will be replaced by the Russian military forces. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation today made a report about the clashes during the previous 24 hours. One more time, they congratulated the Russians with the victory in Artyomovsk, and they added that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, exactly in the Artyomovsk tactical direction, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, this is the lowest level of the losses of the Ukrainians, and this also confirms about the reduced of the activity in this area, and that Wagners are not going to move further. When talking about the entire Donetsk front line, the Minister of Defense added that as a result of fightings from Marinka till Siversk, the Ukrainians, without the losses in Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians lost 120 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 4 artillery systems, mainly of the Western types M777 and M109. During the previous 24 hours, also the Ukrainians lost at least 5 ammo depots, and most of them belongs to the soldiers of 67th Mechanized Brigade, 60th in Krasnaya, 67th in Kramatorsk. There was explosion, and the rest of warehouses are located on the South Donetsk and Kherson area. The Ukrainians from their side during the previous night made another massive missile attack using the Storm Shadows missiles in direction of Berdyansk. The Russians are saying that they launched at least 3 Storm Shadows missiles, 4 Storm Shadows missiles, and 3 just fake missiles that was like to stress the Russian air defense system and so on. Most of them were shut down by the Russians, but 1 missile got the target. But the Russians are saying that there were no losses among civilians in this area. The same level of losses we can see on the Kherson area. The Ukrainians lost 15 soldiers. The Russians confirms that they still controls the islands between in the middle of Dnipro River. Furthermore, the Russians added of destroying of another warehouse in the small settlement Stanislav of 123rd Territorial Defense Brigade. Also, the Russians report about destroying of another radar in this area, INTPQ-36. When talking about South Donetsk, Zaporozhye area, the Ukrainians are saying, and the Russians confirms that Ukrainians completed the creation and accumulation of their forces in this area, but for some reason they are not starting any counter-offensive operation. Probably they wait Zelenskyy, the returns of Zelenskyy. He's going to return maybe tonight or maybe tomorrow, and probably then they're going to launch, it depends of course on the agreements between Zelenskyy and the United States of America. But as you mentioned, as you can see, as soon as the Russians captured and established control over Artyomovsk, the Russians stopped bombing Ukraine with drones and missiles. So the end of April and May was the most difficult months in Ukraine in the history of the special military operation. If you remember, the Russians were bombing them almost every single day with calibers, with daggers, with Iskanders, with drones, with Shahed. And as soon as Bakhmut fell and Artyomovsk rise, there are no more attacks from the Russian side. So probably this is a real operational pause. I expect a real operational pause. It was the previous year during the Mariupol operation and Severodonetsk-Lysychansk operation. Both sides need to fulfill their warehouses, their stocks and so on, and the Russians as well. But who knows what is on the mind of Ukrainians. When talking about Zaporozhye area, the level of loss of the Ukrainians are almost on the same level. the Ukrainians lost South Donetsk. No, the level of losses have been reduced. The Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers in comparison with the previous days. This is the lowest level of losses of Ukrainians since the beginning of May. Probably after fall of Artyomov's Bakhmut, the Russians also changed their tactic in this area and reduced activity as well. And the same situation we can say among the Kupiansk and Liman front line. The level of losses is on the same level as it was yesterday, the day before yesterday. The total losses is around 145 soldiers according to the Ministry of Defense. So that means that there is the same picture as we saw yesterday, the day before yesterday. No activity from the Russian side, just the regular artillery duels, regular clashes, fightings on the combat lines, and 24 hours exchange of the checkpoints on the combat line, when in the morning one party takes checkpoint and by the evening another party returns control over that checkpoint. There are no updates are coming from Serebryanka, from Siversk bridgehead, and currently I expect that this is going to be the most interesting, the next weeks this is going to be the most interesting part of the front line, because based on the configuration of the front line, we see that this is the most obvious movement from the Russian side the next month, the next half a year, at least until the end of this year, to cut the salient and to maintain the bridgehead and to short the front line, to short the combat line in Russian favor. So this is the most obvious steps from the Russian side. So we'll see whether they're going to do this or not. But for now, at least, there are no facts, no evidence, nothing tell us that this is exactly the next Russian direction. So we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine, in the world as well. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.